So Democrats might have a nominee, but some members of Bernie Sanders' own campaign have announced that they will not be endorsing the former vice president. Sanders' former national press secretary Briahna Joy Gray tweeted, "With the utmost respect for Bernie Sanders, who is an incredible human being and genuine inspiration, I do not endorse Joe Biden."
Vermont Senator later responded to this in Associated Press interview, saying she is my former press secretary, not on the payroll. Sanders went on in the interview to talk about why it would, quote, be irresponsible for his supporters to sit out the 2020 election. Briahna is now a contributing editor of Current Affairs and joins us now via Skype to expand on all this. Briahna, it's great to see you. We missed having you on the show.
It's really lovely to be back. Thank you both.
Of course, and now we get the unbridled version. So
yeah, that's right.
Briahna, you've been a public and outspoken figure from the Sanders campaign, talking about why you don't want to endorse Joe Biden. You've been vilified by some kind of more of establishment Democrats. Just want to give you a chance to explain your position here in light of Senator Sanders' not disavowal, but more just distancing from your comments.
Yeah, I think if you look at what Bernie Sanders said, it was that it's irresponsible to decide you don't like Joe Biden and to sit out the election, to decide it just wasn't any of your business. And that's not exactly what I'm out to do. My objective is to push Joe Biden into being a better candidate, a more electable candidate, and a candidate that appeals more to a broad swath of Americans who we all know from poll after poll actually support Bernie Sanders' policies. So to me, saying that you want the guy to actually recognize that a majority of Americans support Medicare for all, saying that before you pledge fidelity to him, you would like to extract some concession out of the leverage that is the only leverage that we as Americans have, which is our vote, isn't irresponsible. It's actually doing what all of us what duty is incumbent on all of us as voting participants in this democracy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what do you make of the fact that, Bernie's now endorsed Joe? All he appears to have gotten is these task force, which, in D.C. doesn't mean a whole lot. Do you feel like he should have pushed for more?
Well, I'm not privy, to what's going on internally. I'm not on a task force and I don't really have any insight to what is going on there. So like I said in my follow-up tweet, I'm looking forward to finding out more about that. I'm looking forward to finding out that perhaps there's already been concessions that have been made that we just aren't privy to yet. And I would be happy to hear about them and to continue to try to develop what Joe Biden can do to bolster his policy on climate change, given that he was given an F- by prominent climate groups. I would love to see whether he has a more robust policy on Medicare for all, given that right now what he's offered is dropping the Medicare age to 60, which is 10 years higher than what Hillary Clinton offered 4 years ago. I think at bare minimum, someone who is not just representing the kind of corporate wing of the Democratic Party, but is now stepping up to represent all of the Democratic Party, has to appreciate the fact that not just progressives, but all Democrats, a majority of independents as well, actually want something more than nothing will fundamentally change. And you can win a primary and still do very, very poorly in a general election if you don't offer something aggressive, something assertive, something affirmative for people to come out and vote for, instead of just this hold your nose situation that we all experienced in 2016, and we know how that turned out.
And it seems pretty self-explanatory. And yet, Briahna, you've kind of become a lightning rod for a lot of people. I mean, from Joy Gray to Frank Luntz saying that you're the reason that Bernie Sanders lost the Democratic primary. And I think that you tweeted, actually, which we covered on the show, that Bernie was actually quite generous in many of the issues against Biden's electability that he didn't bring up. In retrospect, in terms of your own role, why do you think that it is that you frankly just trigger so many of these people when you bring up these things?
I think part of it is that perhaps naively and foolishly on my part, I'm in this for no other reason than because of what my personal beliefs are. I became a journalist because I started writing and freelancing on the side. I was frustrated with what the media narratives were. They didn't seem to be capturing what I saw coming out of the movement, and so I started to write. There was traction there because obviously a lot of other people felt the same way. It manifested into a journalism career, but I did not set out to be a journalist. I did not set out to be the national press secretary for a major political campaign. And now that I'm in neither of those original roles, my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs haven't changed at all. And perhaps that is unique of someone in my position to not immediately pivot and to try to frame my remarks in the way that is most advantageous for my kind of corporate media career ambitions. But the reality is that I just don't happen to have those ambitions, and being faithful to my own values has been a boon to me so far, and I don't see any reason to divert from that path, especially in this moment where there are a lot of people on the left who are really confused about where to go next, who are hurt, who feel like there's not a lot of transparency, who are waiting to have someone fill some kind of leadership void. And I'm not so presumptive as to think that that's me in any way, but I think that it's helpful to hear that there are options. You are allowed to believe and think a wide variety of things, and that this is a moment where the left should be having open and active conversations about what we want this party to look like, what we want this candidacy to look like, and to make sure that we hold our political representatives accountable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, look, nothing is more frightening or dangerous to the establishment consensus in D.C. than free-thinking individuals, and nothing scares them more, especially than free-thinking women of color. So you hit a lot of hot buttons there for people, I think, is a lot of what's going on. Take us, though, a little bit, as you look back at the Sanders campaign. First, I'd love for you to talk about what you think his legacy is, his greatest contribution to America through these two presidential campaigns, and also through his career in the Senate and the House and as mayor of Burlington even. And also, what do you think could have been done differently? Do you think anything could have been done differently to end up with Bernie Sanders right now as the nominee rather than Joe Biden?
Senator Sanders' legacy is certainly intact. Frankly, no matter what happens before this latest race, in my view, he is, an American hero of sorts. No one has done more to push the definition of progressivism to actually be reflective of what it means kind of outside of America, where Bernie Sanders' campaign is considered to be way to the left, but in any other similarly situated country, it would seem moderate at best, right? Because of Bernie Sanders, we not think of healthcare as a human right, not just as a slogan. During the endorsement video, I was a little chagrined to see that Joe Biden said healthcare is a human right, but has offered nothing in terms of policy that suggests that he believes that people should get treatment for all illnesses, all diseases, regardless of what their to pay is, right? So to make people understand, to be able to suggest to people, to show to people that they could ask more from their government, and that the government could actually provide that if it had the political will to do so, is an enormous feat. And it's something that won't be able to go away no matter how much the corporate wing of the Democratic Party maneuvered to make sure that progressives weren't able to win the primary election. In terms of the question of what could have gone differently, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, and obviously the senator was facing a lot of difficult challenges, including the fact that the corporate media wasn't on his side, and there were things that he might have brought up, things that he could have considered talking about, that often it's likely would have been treated as Bernie Sanders' smear attack as opposed to covering the substance of what was actually said. So I don't really want to be in the business of second guessing his decisions, but I think that it is clear that Bernie Sanders, look, another campaign, a different kind of campaign, would have had a super PAC who could have taken the heat for running a lot of different kinds of critical ads about other candidates that Bernie Sanders didn't want to have. But of course, there's a strategic disadvantage there, especially if the media isn't willing to play ball and be in your corner in the least. So I think a real question here is what would have gone differently if the media had covered some of these big red flag issues that are now only going to be unpacked in the context of a general election, with Donald Trump and the Republican Party being the ones who are vetting these claims, instead of a Democrat who could have give them a much more fair, equitable hearing.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense to both of us. Briahna, thank you so much for joining the show. We hope to keep having you back if you'll keep coming.
Yeah, we love having you, Briahna, and congrats
right.
on the new gig as well. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you both.
Yep.
Coming up, our bailout checks coming with an IOU. Dylan Radigan gives his take on the conditions attached to bailout funds. That One Rising continues.